FPS fever was on the rise in the mid-2000s. After the launch of Halo on Xbox, demand for first-person shooters on the console market skyrocketed. The controls for the original Halo gave the console users the closest experience yet to those who were enjoying FPS games on the PC. Not in just the controls, but in the single-player campaign as well as the multiplayer. In time, we also began to see heavy hitters such as the Call of Duty franchise further revolutionize console shooters with its emphasis on cinematic storytelling and its further expansion of competitive multiplayer. With all this excitement around the growing hunger from fans ready to consume FPS content, it's easy to forget about the once dominant console FPS series, Medal of Honor. Now, Medal of Honor didn't just fall off, so to speak, once Halo and Call of Duty came out. The developers at EA, like any other business, would attempt to update and reinvent the series, of course, but the Medal of Honor franchise would never quite reclaim its spot at the top of the FPS market despite some valiant attempts. However, in the mid-2000s, at the launch of the PSP and turn of the next major console cycle, Medal of Honor was still holding a favorable position among console FPS games. Admittedly, I am oversimplifying a lot of the nuance here in accordance to the rise of FPS games and Medal of Honor's place in gaming history, but I think it shows where the franchise was as a whole when today's title, Medal of Honor Heroes, was released. Launching on October 23, 2006, Medal of Honor Heroes takes the established and still popular console FPS series and brought it to Sony's handheld. It wasn't the first FPS to reach the handheld, as that honor goes to Coded Arms, a game that I fully intend to review in the future. However, it was the first of the major FPS franchises at the time of launch on the PSP. So how does it stack up on the PSP, and how is it now nearly 2 decades later? Well, today we are going to find out. This is Medal of Honor Heroes.
Good morning, Captain. The director informed me personally about Lieutenant Patterson's exceptional performance in Market Garden. That's our Jimmy. If only the rest of the operation went quite as well.
Admittedly, off the bat, I only have minimal experience with the franchise as a whole, only playing Frontline and Rising Sun in my youth, and my memories of those games are fleeting at best, unfortunately. I state this to say that while the story mode in Medal of Honor Heroes can be played and understood without experiencing other titles in the series, a lot of nuance and character development / lore in this game is predicated on characters and story from other games. In the story mode, you will play as 3 separate heroes. Sergeant John Baker, who was from Allied Assault, Lieutenant James Patterson, who was from the original Medal of Honor and Frontline, and Lieutenant William Holt, who was in European Assault. However, the story is told through the perspective of Colonel Hargrove from the Office of Strategic Services, speaking with another character named Captain Christopher J. Weston in between campaigns. There are 3 campaigns: Italy, the Netherlands, and Belgium. Like I said before, in between each of these 3 campaigns, Captain Weston will be filled in on the details in the region by Colonel Hargrove, discussing what that particular operation entails. Once you're in the campaign and select a mission, our hero, depending on who you're playing as, will receive orders from Captain Weston about what that particular mission entails. Each campaign has 5 missions to complete, and there are 3 different difficulties between green, which is your easy mode, veteran is normal, and hero is hard. You also do not get to choose which campaign you'll start with, as it proceeds in a mostly linear order, starting with Sergeant Baker. I say mostly because during your campaign, sometimes an extra mission will pop up, giving you the choice between one or the other during your campaign. However, it doesn't change anything in the story overall, as it's simply just playing in a different order. You won't need to complete every mission in a campaign to unlock the next, but you'll need to complete at least 4, including the counterattack missions where you'll return to a previous map, just at a different time of day. You will unlock a new campaign, but I'd recommend just finishing each hero's story before moving on, only because each campaign is fairly quick overall. The story is serviceable, but the mission objectives that you'll accomplish throughout the game don't really feel like they encompass the whole overarching narrative. What I mean by that is, yes, each level you complete is technically helping the overall war effort in the plot, but the objectives, especially the side objectives in each map, feel really interchangeable and have no major meaning. The Enigma machine you pick up in Italy Mission 2 doesn't have major ramifications for events later on, and if they do, then it's only implied at best, as an example. It kind of just felt like completing objectives for the sake of completing objectives. I wasn't necessarily expecting a lot of cohesion between between levels objective-wise, but something would have been better than nothing in my opinion. While fun at first, by the time you've completed and secured the various point objectives more than once, you'll likely be left with a feeling of emptiness when playing through a mission. At least that's kind of how I felt after a while. I will say the plot in between the missions and campaign are kinda interesting, with us following around the exploits of the current hero through the briefing by Captain Weston. Adding in a bit of nuance and context to each mission in the game does help in getting you invested. However, they become little more than dressing with no real filling upon entering into a map, since what you're doing in the game doesn't really have too much bearing overall on the plot. The before level briefings do a decent enough job getting you invested in the character, but that development falls apart the second the level starts. The in-level storytelling, what little there is in each level, actually hurts the narrative because it feels less like we're following the exploits of one of the heroes and more so just some random no-name soldier. It also doesn't help each level ranges from 7 to 9 minutes long on average, which leaves almost all room for character development up to the player's imagination. The level design and storytelling issue might come down to each of the maps used in the game being used over in multiplayer as well. Perhaps that was part of the design plan, create maps that can be used for both the multiplayer and single player function. It's hard to not get the multiplayer vibe when you're playing a mission though. I appreciate the multiplayer function, which I'll get into in a minute as I'm sure many others did, but the servers are no longer available, so you're more likely not playing this game via ad hoc on emulator, if you are playing the game online at all. More likely you're playing heroes today for the campaign, and it's kind of hard to justify playing through this very short campaign, which clocks in at roughly less than 2 hours on veteran. And I managed to beat it over the course of 3 nights, playing it extremely casually. Playing through the campaign, I actually wasn't aware that the characters you're playing as are from previous games. So when little tidbits about characters named Manon, for example, would pop up, I was a bit confused and chalked it up to an attempt at fleshing the story out a bit more, which I appreciated at the time. I know now that this is actually lore building from previous games, so it's possible that if you've played some of the previous games, you might get more out of the story and its lore than I did on my initial playthrough. It was the first World War II shooter on the PSP, and I don't want to be overly negative here. The story itself is a serviceable World War II story, or stories I should say, and it does contain a few interesting lore bits about the heroes, but overall it's not nearly as deep as its peers. And if you're looking for anything stronger to chew on with the game, in terms of its single player, you might be a little bit disappointed. Don't get me wrong, I think you'll have some fun playing through this casually, but after once through, you probably will not be going back to complete the game on the various difficulties for rewards, or to re-engage with the story. The story becomes a case of, if you've played a World War II shooter before, then you'll more or less have already experienced this in a very similar fashion, what the game's narrative has to offer, with the extra tiny bits of lore added in for each of the returning heroes if you've experienced other games in the franchise in the past. While the graphics are fairly decent and standard for the time, one of the things I think Medal of Honor does very well here are the little details in the game. From finding little passages with beds and decorations in them, to watching all the helmets of the allies and enemies alike go flying off in different directions from being too close in proximity to an exploding grenade. Speaking again on those grenade effects as they went off near me, they went out of their way to really make you feel that impact when you're standing next to an explosion. And genuinely, I wasn't expecting it. The force used from the grenade discharge, added with the slight disorientation from the blast, was really impressive, especially on handhelds for 2006.
Americans! Nice shot! I'm throwing a grenade!
Everything from machine gun fire to RPGs all felt like it had some weight to them, either taking hits or just firing the weapons in general. All of this went a long way in immersing me into this experience. There's also the sheer amount of enemies you'll see on screen. The game was designed to be able to play via multiplayer with up to 32 players, so it's impressive on screen seeing all the different enemies fighting all at once. It also shows off just how powerful the PSP was back in 2006. I think it's really cool, and no matter what you consider say good or bad about this game, Medal of Honor Heroes nails the feeling of the World War II shooter down to a T. Upon starting the game up, the commando control scheme is utilized, but you can swap it out if you want to a different control scheme. I chose to stick with this control scheme, and right away I want to make a quick suggestion. Please head to the options and turn up the speed it takes for you to turn horizontally and vertically right away. Trust me, your character is way too slow to function properly without these adjustments, and your enjoyment of the game will rapidly decrease if you are utilizing the default speeds for turning and looking. I'm thinking maybe they wanted to make it really easy to aim at the enemies, but in functionality it doesn't feel well, so give those turns a buff. That being said, the aiming here is very forgiving, with your crosshairs taking up a large area, and generally as long as the enemy is within that area, they'll take a hit. You can aim for certain spots on the body, and I didn't see too many issues with the hit detection there. I'd even say the hit detection is pretty good overall, with the exception of enemies being too far away. If you're not using a rifle, don't even bother shooting, as you'll just be wasting ammo because the game doesn't register hits from super far away without a scoped weapon. There's also a cool leaning feature in the game too. If you're aiming down your sights, you can press the left or right D-pad button, allowing you to tilt in either direction so you can maintain some level of cover and back into cover if need be. Despite it being cool, truthfully, I would rarely use this unfortunately, and would forget most of the time that it's available as you don't really need it to complete the game, but it's probably very handy in multiplayer, especially if you're playing with aim assist off. Speaking of, yes, there is an aim assist in the game that makes targeting the enemies a bit easier, but it's not overbearing. You'll still need to at least get the enemy in your crosshairs, of course, but the aim assist will rarely hold your hand here. I say rarely because there are a few instances where the camera clearly swings onto an enemy. I'm not sure if there is a certain way to do this in-game or if it was just trying to throw me a bone, but it was there. All that being said, the major caveat here is whether or not you can get used to the single analog control of an FPS. I will say, it takes a bit of getting used to, but once you're in, it doesn't take too long for your brain to acclimate to the change. Gunfire and control in general are solid and responsive, with no noticeable lag between pressing the buttons and the actions. At least none I was able to see. You'll only carry 3 weapons at a time, your primary, sidearm, and grenades, and switching between them is fast and easy to do. You're only allowed 1 different primary weapon at a time, and thankfully it's as simple as utilizing the action button to swap out primaries. Overall, despite having a very dense amount of controls for the character, once you know what all the buttons do, it's pretty intuitive and makes logical sense, making it easy to get adjusted to whatever control scheme you choose. Now, reloading speed and guns you can reload in general in the game is kinda all over the place. Some weapons, like the M1 Garand, reload very quickly, however, you're not given the option to reload by pressing a button. You just have to wait till you run out of ammo to reload. On the other hand, the Thompson allows you to reload right away, however, it's extremely slow to reload. And legitimately, it's painful, and oftentimes it does feel like the enemies will swarm you while you're reloading this particular weapon. I would genuinely dread any time I had the Thompson as my default weapon. One final nitpick, but the speed of your character is pretty rough in general, and while you can sprint by double tapping your run button forward, it only lasts a few seconds before your stamina needs to refill. I get what they were going for here with short bursts being more lifelike, since on a real battlefield you're not going to be sprinting full speed in full kit, but a slight bump in speed would feel a lot better for what they were trying to do in the game for the character's base walk/run. Aside from my minor nitpicks, as long as you know what you're getting yourself into with an FPS on the PSP, there are no real major gripes from me, and you'll be able to settle nicely in for the experience.
The enemy is here! Got him on the run! Save some for us!
The sound design here is fantastic, both with headphones and without. Everything from the gunshots to the explosions, all the sound effects here are great. There is some voiceover in-game, but mostly just shouting about grenades and or the Nazis threatening to attack you. They're not overbearing here and pass pretty well as far as in-game VO is concerned, while sounding clear and crisp. The bulk of the storytelling, as I said earlier, takes place through the perspective of Colonel Hargrove, and whether or not you like him, I think will be a bit subjective. His voice acting acting here is a bit over the top in that old-timey kind of way. I found him enjoyable, but understood his performance was definitely dialing it up a bit, if you know what I mean.
Whose actions you will heretofore be overseeing. This is the file for Sergeant John Baker. He's a recent OSS recruit, currently serving in Italy as part of Operation Avalanche. He and his men will next be tasked with seizing an Enigma machine to help with our code-breaking efforts, but mainly, he'll be prepping the area near the Volturno line for our incoming forces.
He's not the most over-the-top character ever created for games like this, but the performance does borderline on being a bit hokey. So this might come down to personal preference, and I can see some people being turned off by the performance. However, there isn't many scenes with this character, so you don't have to bear with him too much if you're in the camp of disliking him. As far as a musical score, there isn't much of one here. There is a main menu theme that carries over to the other menus and mode selections that does its job well, but it is lifted from Medal of Honor Allied Assault. In-game, however, there is no music save for a little stinger whenever you accomplish an objective. According to the Medal of Honor Heroes wiki, this stinger is from the track called Fleeing the Catacombs, which is a track used in Medal of Honor Underground, and comes about a minute 40 seconds into the track, if you wanted to look this up here on YouTube. I would have liked to have seen a bit more in the soundtrack department, especially with the other details being so meticulous in other departments presentation-wise, so that aspect's a bit disappointing. Still, overall, the audio design in general, encompassing everything, is of a high quality and genuinely pretty impressive for the time. The computer-controlled enemy AI is not so great here. It ranges from doing absolutely nothing to running right up to you. Even then, you're likely not going to take much damage, at least on veteran and below. Really, the big danger here is the grenades, as enemy soldiers are very grenade happy, so I would get used to kicking the grenades away with the action button very quickly, or you will find yourself very dead very quick. Your squad AI is not much better, albeit their accuracy is a lot better than the enemy AI, which is both a good thing and a bad thing if you're shooting for getting all the gold medals in a stage. Squad AI will automatically target the nearest enemy, however, one of the deciding factors on what medal you will receive is based on the amount of kills in a level, so you can see where there might be an issue there. Granted, you could just roam the map attacking randomly spawning Nazis, so I guess there's no real middle ground here. Still, if that's not enough, the squad AI will also randomly get lost a majority of the time. You'll find yourself alone asking where your squad's gone off to, or worse yet, stand right in the way of grenades and or objectives where you need to plant explosives, getting themselves obliterated in the process. There is also no squad-based control, so whatever your allies do is entirely of their own volition. I think the best way to describe the AI here is one step forward and one step back. For every good thing they do, there's a counter to it. I think the devs even knew this because there is no negative ramification for squad members dying in-game, which at least to me is kind of funny in a roundabout way since we are playing a game about heroes, yet you're sort of incentivized to not care about your squad mates. Clearly, self-sacrifice was not one of the core army values for the heroes you play as, but your squad mates took it a little too literally.
Keep at it! Got it! Nice shot!
For each mission, you're given a primary objective and usually multiple secondary objectives, of which are just go collect an item that's designated on the map. For your primary objectives, these will range from blowing up targets to holding areas on a map or collecting intel. In reality, these objectives are more or less set up so that they are similar to what you'll experience in multiplayer. Your secondary objectives will tie into what medal you receive at the end of each mission. However, other than that, they are mostly superfluous and don't add anything to the overall story, as mentioned previously. If you're a completionist or want to collect all of the costumes legitimately, you'll need to complete all the secondary objectives, which admittedly are very easy to accomplish, especially because they are always within walking distance and are conveniently marked on your compass. I found myself completing all the secondary objectives on my first playthrough during my first time completing a stage, making them barely an inconvenience, but it would have been nicer to see a bit more variety, like blowing up a target or freeing hostages, etc. etc., etc. To be fair, during the Belgian operation mission, Recover the Plans, you have the optional mission to assassinate 2 Nazi generals, but this mission is the exception, and again, similar to the item collection, they are all within walking distance. I will stress again, if you're going for golds, you will need to ensure your accuracy and kill count is high as well. Just completing the side objectives and main objectives will only net you a silver medal. There is also an achievement system here. Aside from gaining unlockables via gold medals, you can also gain costumes and medals by completing certain tasks in-game, like defeating 100 soldiers with a specific gun, or completing certain levels on certain difficulties. This will be located in your service record, and you can view all the current achievements that you've accomplished, plus the requirements to unlock the others. For those wanting to sink their teeth into achievement hunting, there is a pretty fair amount to do here. There's a lot of attention to detail on the map levels, with plenty of cover fire, hidden weapons, and passages to go through. Even the game's manual states, quote, "Play 15 open-ended campaign missions" in its introduction setting. Despite this, as I mentioned earlier, the lack of real meaningful objectives lets the single-player function of the maps down quite a bit. The levels are meticulously designed, especially for the PSP, although I think from a campaign perspective, overall, the single-player levels are quite a bit lacking. Multiplayer side of these maps, though, are the complete opposite. When looking at the maps in Medal of Honor Heroes with a multiplayer perspective, for the most part, they're large and sprawling, making them fun to engage with when hunting down friends and other players. Honestly, I think they are fantastically designed as multiplayer maps. The game originally featured up to 32 players that could have played at once in-game on the EA servers, and the map sizes and design truly justify that here. Plenty of open areas, but also enough indoor spaces and cover to really maximize the multiplayer experience. Each area is well planned out with multiple entrances and exits. Very rarely did I find myself in like a dead end when navigating through these maps. Out of everything in this game, I think the thing that shines through the most is the map design in the context of multiplayer. As single-player maps, however, as I've said, they do fall short, but I think that has more to do with the objectives and lack of in-game narrative, more so than the level design itself. Segueing into multiplayer, for a portable title and being one of the first PSP games on the handheld, Medal of Honor Heroes does have a surprisingly dense multiplayer here. Multiple game modes spread across 15 different maps. This includes the single-player skirmish mode and ad hoc games. There are also 15 different weapons if you include melee attacks and grenades. The stat screen does here, so that's why I'm also including it as well. Truly, I think when designing this game, multiplayer was at the forefront, as I could see this game being a blast to play back in 2006 when it initially launched. Unfortunately, the servers for the 32-player matches are no longer available, and PPSSPP emulation does not currently support it. I'd love to try it one day if it ever gets a patch to do so, but until then, the 8-player matches work fine. Albeit, I was only able to test these with my brother and not the full 8 people. There are 6 different game modes. Deathmatch, which is self-explanatory. Infiltration, which is your standard capture the flag. Demolition, which sees you and your compatriots attempt to plant explosives against an opposing team. And in this mode, you're usually given multiple bomb points that you can potentially plant the bomb at. If either team is defeated before a bomb is planted, then the team still standing wins. If a bomb is planted, then the defending team must protect the bomb until the timer runs out. Respawns also happen here to give each team a fighting chance. Hold the line, which sees teams battling for control of a singular point on the map. You'll need to hold that point for a certain amount of accumulative time to win. Battle lines has your team attempting to control multiple points. The more you have, the faster your score accumulates. And finally, domination, which sees you again fighting over control of multiple points, with the game ending after all points are taken by a singular team. I should note that there is no team deathmatch, and every other multiplayer game is team-based, minus deathmatch. During matches, you will not have access to medkits. Instead, the use key actually changes to a wheel of various emotes that you can use to communicate with your teammates. Still, it is a cool feature that I'm glad the devs thought of ahead of time. Overall, Medal of Heroes is a Overall, Medal of Honor Heroes is a decent first attempt at a World War II shooter on the PSP. It excels in aspects I truly wasn't expecting, while leaving plenty of room for improvement later on. I do think overall I enjoyed my time with Medal of Honor Heroes, despite the campaign becoming fairly repetitive later on, and its incredibly short runtime. In terms of lasting impressions, while it did do a lot of things right, I probably won't be coming back to it anytime soon to relive the campaign, as almost immediately upon its completion, I felt no real desire to replay the levels on harder difficulties, or even attempt to get all the gold medals. However, I have my entire playthrough on my other channel, PS Pub Plays, if you wanted to check that out. That being said, if you enjoy FPS games on the PSP, or if you're a fan of the previous games in the franchise, it's worth checking out for the somewhat extension on the lore of the heroes you'll play as, despite it being very, very minimal. I will stress again, if you have a pre-existing history with the franchise, you'll probably get a lot more out of this entry than I did. I'd pay no more than a few dollars for it if you can get it inexpensively. However, if you're wanting to get friends together to play online, which I do recommend because it is pretty fun, I'd recommend running the game through PPSSPP or PSP's ad hoc with you and your friends in the same area, now that the EA servers are shut down. Overall, it's not a bad game, but I'd rank it at average to slightly above average personally. On Metacritic, the game is sitting at a 71 for critic and a 7.1 for users, slightly higher than what I'd rank it since I gave it a 6 overall, with most of the talking points from critics and users parroting my similar sentiments for the game here as well, but overall they found a bit more enjoyment out of it than I did. That being said, I did enjoy my time with Rengoku more, despite both games having a bit of repetitive issues and Rengoku's serious grind in the game's second half. I still think Rengoku's story was not only more engaging, but it left a longer lasting impression. I'm more likely to return to the world of Rengoku before coming back to this. Medal of Honor Heroes did receive a follow-up, Medal of Honor Heroes 2, which I'll be covering sometime in the future, so make sure to subscribe, like the video, and let me know other games you'd like to see me cover in the future and what you thought of this title. This is the PS Pub, and I thank you for watching.